Hi guys, finally I was able to set up the entire stream. Actually, this is the first time I'm going live via Zoom on YouTube, so there was a little bit of confusion, but I think now we are all set to go. Hi guys, finally Actually, this okay, perfect. So I was able to hear myself. Okay. So let's begin with writing fundamentals. Actually, I am not on the YouTube dashboard right now. I am on the Zoom dashboard, so I'm not able to see the comments. So I have set up my phone right next to me just so I will be able to keep an eye on the comments that you guys will be posting. So just allow me a couple of minutes to be able to see your comments because I need to be keeping my eye on the presentation in front of me and also on the comments that will be coming here. So just allow me a couple of minutes to just sync everything. Okay, so so I have the chats all set up, and now we are going to begin writing fundamentals series in which I'm going to conduct 10 weekly lives uh, on the fundamentals of writing. And we are going to be starting off with the most basic thing that's needed, that is anatomy of a story. So let's begin. Now, before we dive into the entire uh, writing, let us let me first introduce myself. My name is Heena Rathore-Pardeshi, and for those of you who do not know me already, I'm an award-winning author and a developmental editor. And I have over a decade of experience, actually almost 12 years of experience in the writing industry, in the Indian publishing industry. And I have a couple of published books. I'll just show them to you. So the first one is Deceived. This was an absolute hit with my readers, and I am very proud to say that I was able to create a little bit of a fan base because of this book. It's a psychological thriller, and it was my first novel. It took me about 8 months to write this novel from start to finish. And this novel actually was about 92,000 word novel. The second novel came out this year itself. It is The Manor, and it is a gothic horror novella. It's just a novella, and you can totally read it like in maybe 2, 3 days. Actually, a couple of hours if you are used to reading a lot. If not, then a couple of days at max. So these are my two published works. I've also contributed to the anthology by a German scholar, journalist, and author, Francis Herman, and Symbiosis's linguistics head, Dr. Hilda. This is a very genre specific book on the craft of writing. And my contribution to this was how to write about psychopaths. So this is The Moving Finger. And these are the books that are published. I have another 5 novels in the pipeline. Hopefully, the next one will be coming out early in January in the coming year. And it is going to be on the craft of writing. Uh, The Art of Storytelling. I do have the cover for it now, but I would like to uh, actually did not prepare the presentation with that cover, but I'll share the cover here or there. I'll just quickly put, yes, okay. I'm just keeping an eye on the live comments as well. Okay, so to continue to finish off my introduction, uh, I've worked with a lot of authors over the years in editing their books, in critiquing their books, in assessing their books, and in making their books uh, the best they can be. So I've worked with a lot of authors, and the majority of my client base is of the NRIs, because the authors staying outside of India who are Indians have thankfully trusted me to bridge the cultural gap that creates a very big problem when you are writing uh, your story, which is half based in India, but is for the global audiences. So that is kind of my specialty. I love working on fiction books, but it's very surprising, but most of my client base comes from non-fiction background. So I work with a lot of non-fiction, mostly autobiographical, memoirs, and biographies. So this is about me. I love reading a lot. I read about 100 to 120 books every year, and I have been doing so consistently for the last 11 years now. So I read a lot. I read for pleasure. I do reading as profession of unpublished manuscripts, and I feel really blessed that I'm able to do so much with books because they are my passion and now they're my profession as well. So I would like to wholeheartedly welcome you all to my series, Writing Fundamentals, where I'm going to teach the basic fundamentals of writing over 10 weeks. And today we are going to begin with the first week, and our topic is anatomy of a story. Let's begin. We are done with the introduction. Okay, so the main first question is, what is a story? Now, I know all of you have your own interpretation of what a story is, and I would love to hear your interpretation of what do you think a story is. Uh, if you've attended my earlier webinars or workshops or the classes that I used to take almost 3 to 4 years ago, then you might already know the answer to this question because this is one of the few topics that I always cover in my workshops. So I'm sure if you've attended those, then you know, or if you've watched those videos, then you know. But if not, I would really still like to know what is your take on story? What do story mean to you? Keep on commenting. I will be reading each and every single comment. Uh, I might read them out loud at the end of the session as well. But I will be reading all of them and I'll be replying to all of them. So I would love to know what you think a story is. Now, a story is essentially a sequence of events connected by cause and effect, experienced through the perspective of a character or narrator who undergoes change. Now, in simple words, a story is about someone who wants something and faces obstacles while trying to get that something. But beneath that simple definition, there lies a network of emotional, psychological, and thematic architecture that transforms plain information or a very simple concept into organized storytelling. And that is exactly what we are going to learn in today's session. Think of a story as a psychological experience that is more than a sequence of events. It's not the event of the boy loses his dog that moves us. It's how we feel about that loss through the boy. Wait with me for a second. So, when we craft stories, we need to be asking ourselves three very main questions, three very, very important questions. First is, what emotional truth am I exploring in the story? Second is, where does the reader feel the story shift? And third is, what tension holds it together? Now, I'll give you a couple of examples. Actually, I'll give you one example that is going to make this entire concept of story very clear in your head. It is a very popular book, Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. It is essentially a history book, right? But we remember it because it's storytelling disguised as anthropology. He gives humanity a narrative arc from primitive tribes to technological gods, right? That's a superb arc. And suddenly, history turns into drama. And that is why it's so well loved by the readers. Now, I'm sorry, my throat is a little sore. So you'll have to forgive me for a second. But why do we need stories? Now, since the dawn of civilization, the need of stories is so ingrained in humans that we simply cannot stay away from them. I'll just move on to the next slide. We need stories to fulfill four of our basic needs. First is psychological needs, emotional needs, then cultural needs, and spiritual needs. Psychologically, stories help us organize our experience. The human brain is wired for narrative. So we think not in terms of, say, lists or random ideas. No, we think in terms of arcs. Okay? We are going to be talking about arcs a little bit later, so I will go into arcs then. But for now, hold this thought. We think in arcs, we think in stories, okay? Now, emotionally, stories let us feel safe. They give us a very controlled space to experience danger, grief, loss, love, the full range of emotions. Culturally speaking, stories help us transmit values, traditions, and knowledge. And spiritually, and most importantly, stories help us bridge the gap between the visible and the invisible because they help us understand not only what happens, but why it happens. Now, let me give you two examples because I have a lot of students who love fiction as well as non-fiction. I'll be giving you examples of fiction as well as non-fiction so that everyone is able to understand the concept a little bit better. The first example that I'd like to give you is from The Great Gatsby. The events are simple. A man throws parties to win back his lost love. But the story is about illusion, desire, and the decay of the American dream. In the same way, in Educated by Tara Westover, the events are factual. A girl grows up in a strict, isolated household and eventually educates herself. But the story is about freedom, self definition, and reclaiming one's voice. Now, these are the four basic needs that we need stories for. Moving forward, we are going to look at the difference between story, plot, and narrative. Story is the emotional and the thematic journey. Plot is the chronological chain of events. And narrative is the telling of the story. It involves the structure, the voice, and the perspective through which the story is experienced. Okay? Now, let us have a look at the ingredients of a story. What exactly makes a story? Which is the core question that we are going to explore in today's session. Every story, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, needs five essential elements or ingredients, as we'll be calling them in this session. The first one is character. Let's talk a little bit about character. I'll also give you examples so that we can go through and process each and every single element as we go forward. A story begins when someone wants something, okay? Without a character, there is no emotional anchor for your story. We need a consciousness through which we experience the world. In fiction, this is often your protagonist, or as we call the protagonist as the main character, the MC. But it can also be a collective, an idea, or even a force of nature. Okay. Now, in nonfiction, it's often you. In memoir, or the central figure or subject whose transformation we are going to be following if it's a biography. Now, let us look at the example of The Kite Runner by Khalid Hosseini. The character in The Kite Runner is Amir, who is a privileged boy from Kabul. The essence of this character is cowardice, guilt, and longing for redemption. Why he works? Because Amir is deeply flawed. We dislike and pity him, yet we see ourselves in him. His contradictions make him real. For nonfiction, we are going to be looking into Educated by Tara Westover. It's a beautiful book. If you guys have not yet read anything, I'm sorry, if you guys have not yet read Tara Westover's Educated, then do make sure to read it because it's an excellent, excellent book. In Educated, our character is Tara herself. She is a girl raised in isolation by survivalist parents. Her essence is she's intelligent, but she's trapped between loyalty and self actualization. Why she works as a character? Even though she's a real character, right? She is a real person. She's writing about herself, but in the book, she herself is a character. She works because of the internal conflict, because Tara's internal conflict mirrors a universal struggle. That is the tension between belonging and becoming. Now, readers never fall in love with good characters. They always fall in love with true and realistic characters. The characters who reflect the fractures of being human, and the characters with whom the readers can see themselves in. Then and only then can they relate to these characters. Now, let's look at the second ingredient of the story, that is desire. Desire, also known as goal, is an engine that drives the story. So it is extremely, extremely important. Once we have a character, we must know what they want. Desire creates that direction, okay? And it gives the story momentum to go forward. Without a clear desire, the story will drift a 100%. With it, with the desire, if we have the desire spot on, if we have nailed the desire, then the story will move forward without any problems. Even if the desire keeps on changing, because the goals and the desires of your character will keep on changing as we move from Act 1 to Act 2 and then to Act 3. Okay, we are going to be talking more about acts in the later sections of today's session. But keep this in mind that the desire is going to be changing as our hero or the character goes through transformation. Now, desire can be external, like a tangible goal. For example, winning a race or escaping the prison, or it can be internal, okay? An emotional or psychological need, say for redemption, for love, or trying to find their self-worth, and stuff like that. Now, if we look at the kite runner, Amir's external desire is to earn his father's approval. Amir's internal desire is to forgive himself and move on, and in the process, be a good man or be a good person again. Every decision he makes, from betraying Hassan to returning to Kabul, stems from this dual desire. The more desire or the strong the desire will be, the better your characterization will be. Also, the more the desires are, the layered your character will be. In Educated, Tara's external desire is to get an education, but her internal desire is to find her voice and identity that is separate from her family's. Her academic journey is actually a metaphor for psychological emancipation. A story begins the moment desire meets resistance. And that is why desire is one of the main components when it comes to a story. Now, when you are working on an idea and you want to craft a story, you need to ask yourself, what does my protagonist want so badly that they're willing to suffer for it? And that will be the desire of your character. That will be meeting resistance, which we'll be talking in the following sections. But desire is a very, very important component when it comes to character creation. And a story is literally nothing without a character. Now, moving on, the third ingredient of a story is conflict. Conflict, conflict, conflict. Conflicts are good. They are amazing. One second. Need to charge my MacBook. For some reason, it's not charging right now. Just give me one moment, please. Sorry about that. All of a sudden, my MacBook was not charging at all. And it was showing service recommended, which is literally the first time that I'm actually seeing that kind of notification. It literally gives me a little heart attack. Okay, so moving on. The third ingredient that we need is conflict. Conflict is one of the most important elements when it comes to writing a story. If your story doesn't have conflict or actually a series of conflicts, then your story will not be liked by a reader. And that is a globally, universally accepted truth by all writers, whether they write for TV, whether they write for novels, whether they write for series, whether they write for anything or anyone. Okay? Now, conflict is basically your catalyst for transformation. Okay? Desire creates story, but conflict is what will give it meaning. Conflict is not just about fights or villains, it's about friction between what is and what could be. Okay? Now, there are three primary types of conflict: external, internal, and philosophical. External conflict is against other people, society, nature, or circumstances. Internal conflict is against the self. Guilt, fear, morality, indecision, stuff like that. And then philosophical conflicts. A, a philosophical conflict is basically against ideas such as faith, justice, freedom, truth, etc. Let us look at the kite runner. Uh, before that, uh, when we are talking about conflict, don't think of it as you need to have either an external conflict or an internal conflict or a philosophical conflict. The more conflicts you introduce, the more layered your story will be. But that does not mean that you are going to go ahead and introduce unnecessary conflicts, but the more conflicts you have, the better your story will be. So try and infuse as much conflict in your story as you possibly can. If we look at the kite runner, the external conflict is the Soviet invasion and later the Taliban regime. The internal conflict is Amir's shame and cowardice after betraying Hassan. And the philosophical conflict is the question of whether redemption is possible after moral failure. Now, as you can see, there are all three conflicts present in this book. And not just in this book, if you're going to take any good book, it will have a lot of conflicts, and some will be external, some will be internal, and some will be philosophical. I'm not saying they should be the main conflict of your story. Not all of them, obviously, because the main conflict will be one or maybe two. But you need to layer your entire story with a lot of different kinds of conflicts. Now, the novel's power lies in how these three conflicts overlap, each one amplifying the others in the kite runner. And the same thing will happen in your novel if you are able to execute conflict properly. Let us look at Educated. In Educated, the external conflict is Tara's father's extremist beliefs and her family's isolation. Internal conflict is her struggle to reconcile loyalty with truth, and her philosophical conflict is the clash between knowledge and blind faith, between self-determination and obedience. Now, as you will see, again, we have three conflicts, and three are helping each other get escalated. Okay? Always remember the conflict must escalate. Always. Each obstacle should cost the character something. It can be pride, innocence, or love, or belief. That cost is the reader's emotional entry point into your story. Now, let's talk about the fourth ingredient of a story: change or transformation. Now, change or transformation is extremely important because without transformation, a story is actually not a story. It is simply a snapshot of what your character is right now. If there will be no transformation, then there is literally no point to a story. Now, the transformation can be positive or negative. Uh, there can be zero transformation, but then your character will have to be extremely realistic. For example, that only now I actually did not want to discuss it in this session, but I'll just tell you. For example, Hercule Poirot and Sherlock Holmes, these are the characters that do not actually undergo transformation, but there always is tiny amount of transformation that happens in their character or personality, but there's not an overall transformation happening. So that those are extreme cases, or the rare cases, which we will be discussing when we'll be talking about characters. Now, characters start one way and end another, often circling back to the beginning, but with new awareness. In The Kite Runner, Amir is a boy defined by cowardice and privilege, but by the end, he is a man seeking atonement, risking his life to save Sora. His redemption arc is not about erasing guilt, but about earning peace. In Educated, at the beginning, Tara sees the world through her father's paranoid lens. But by the end, she creates her own worldview. Even if it is fractured, painful, but it is her own. The transformation is intellectual here, and it is also emotional because it goes from silence to self definition. But it is transformation nonetheless. Change can be visible or invisible. Okay. When we're talking about transformation, the change can be visible or invisible. If it is visible, it'll be physical survival or maybe relationship status that changes. When it is invisible, it'll be your worldview or your courage or your moral clarity. Readers don't always need happy endings. What they need is evolution, and that evolution will be the proof that the journey of the character mattered in some or the other way. Now, apart from these four main ingredients, there is another ingredient to story, and that is theme. Now, theme is one topic that we'll be discussing in the story spine, which will come after this. But why I've included theme here is theme is not only important when we start constructing a story or creating a story, but it is also very important to the axis of rotation of the story. That's why I've included it at the start as well here and in the later topic of the story spine as well. If your earlier four ingredients are well executed, the fifth element, that is the theme, will emerge on its own. So this is a very good test for your story. If you are able to nail the first four elements and a theme emerges, that means you are right on track. If it does not, that only means that you need to go back and work on the first four elements until you get a theme emerge out of your story. Theme is essentially the meaning of our story, the why behind our story. It's the invisible thread that ties your character, desire, conflict, and change or transformation together. It's what your story says about life without ever saying it directly. Theme is not some kind of a moral, okay? It's an exploration. It's kind of an open ended question. For example, in Kite Runner, we have themes of guilt, redemption, friendship, class divide, moral cowardice, etc. But the underlying meaning of these themes is there is a way to be good again. And the story asks the readers, us, can we undo the wrongs of our past? Or does redemption come only through suffering? I'll just let that sink in because that is so beautiful. Without ever asking that question, the story asks us this when we read the Kite Runner, right? And that is why some stories feel so good and they stay with you even after you're done with them. That happens only when they have beautiful themes emerging out of them. So, if you want your novel to be something so good that the readers will be talking about it for a long time after they are done with your book, then you need to have a theme emerge. And not just one theme, you need to have multiple themes emerge out of your novel, and your novel needs to ask some basic questions to the reader. In Educated, the themes are of identity, education, family, and freedom. The underlying meaning is knowledge is liberation, but it also isolates a person. And the story asks us, can you become someone new without betraying who you were? The moment you realize the questions that the story is trying to ask you, you kind of settle in this beautiful thinking phase, where after you've put down the novel, you keep on thinking about it and you keep on discussing the novel with different people. And that's how you know the story is good. Now, theme emerges naturally when the other four ingredients are in harmony. It'll emerge automatically. You don't decide the theme, okay? You can direct it, but you do not decide the theme of your novel. You discover it by watching what your characters become. Now, it's time to move on to the next section of our life. I'll just take a break of just 1 minute here to have water. I'll be right back. And I'm back. So let's begin with story structure. Okay, before we get to the three act structure, let's talk a little bit about the structure of the story and why it matters. Now that we understand what a story is made of, that is character, desire, conflict, change, or transformation, and meaning or theme, let's talk about how all these ingredients come together and hold shape. Because without shape, even the most beautiful idea will fall apart. And The answer is structure. A structure is the shape that holds the entire story together. It's the architecture of emotion. Why does structure matter so much in storytelling? Every story, whether you consciously plan it or not, follows a rhythm of change. Even your own life does. You start somewhere, something happens, it changes you, and you end somewhere new. And then the cycle begins all over again. That's all structure really is. It's a pattern of transformation. When students say, I'm a discovery writer, I don't use structure, I always tell them that you already do because our brains think in patterns. Beginning, middle, end. That's a pattern. And actually, beginning, middle, and end is actually a structure, which is nothing but conflict escalation resolution, aka setup, surprise, satisfaction. Now, that's the rhythm every good story has, whether you use it consciously or subconsciously. Sorry. Now, let's talk about the classic three-act structure. Aristotle gave it to us 2000 years ago, and we are still using it because it works for both fiction as well as non-fiction. Why does it work? Because it mirrors how we experience life. Let us talk about Act 1. In three-act structure, we have three acts. Act 1, the beginning or the setup. Act 2, the middle or confrontation. And Act 3, the end or resolution. In Act 1, we introduce our character, their world, and what's at stake. Something happens, that is the inciting incident, that changes everything. Now, the key question in Act 1 is, why can't life go on as usual anymore? Because something happened, and that something will be your inciting incident. The incident that kickstarts your novel. For example, in Hunger Games, Katniss volunteers to save her sister in the reaping, so her ordinary world is shattered. In Educated, Tara glimpses the outside world. Education becomes her rebellion. Your Act 1 ends the moment your protagonist steps into unfamiliar territory, that is literal or emotional. Now, Act 2, the middle or confrontation. The protagonist is tested, conflicts escalate, stakes rise, and truths are revealed. Usually, this contains a midpoint, that is a revelation or reversal that changes the direction of the story. The key question to ask here is, what's the cost of pursuing the goal of your character? In The Kite Runner, Amir's betrayal of Hassan is the cost that he has to pay for his goal, and everything crumbles. In Wild by Cheryl Strayed, Cheryl's physical journey becomes emotional therapy. Act 2 is the longest act in the three-act structure and where most writers get lost because the portion of the book, if we are to divide the entire book in the three-act structure, it's going to be 25%, 50%, and 25%. So the longest part or the biggest part of your novel, that is the 50% chunk, is the middle, and that's why we get a sagging middle. But if you keep pushing the tension higher, you will be able to push the inner journey deeper, and that's how you deal with the sagging middle. But a simpler way to solve the problem of the sagging middle is the next structure that we'll be studying. But before that, Act 3, that is the end or the resolution in the 3-act structure. In Act 3, we have the climax where everything changes, everything converges. The protagonist either achieves or fails their goal, but transformation is inevitable. And the story ends with emotional closure. The key question to ask here is what has truly changed? Inside or outside, or inside and outside? For example, in Kite Runner, Amir rescues Saurabh. Redemption is earned there. In Educated, Tara accepts that she can never return to her old life and her identity is redefined. Now, in short, the 3-act structure is Act 1 promise, Act 2 struggle, and Act 3 meaning. Now, coming back to the topic of sagging middle, because here we have this big 50% middle portion. If you do not want to end up in a maze of the sagging middle, then you can simply divide the middle into 2 parts and work on it separately like this. The 4-act structure is essentially when we divide the second act into 2 acts. So the division of the entire story will be 25%, 25%, 25%, and 25%. Now it's much easier to work on. In Act 1, we are going to have setup, defining the character, their world, and their goal. In Act 2, you can call it Act 2A, Act 2B, or you can call them Act 2 and Act 3. Okay, we are going to call them Act 2 and Act 3. In Act 2, we will have a response. That is the reaction to conflict from a character. In Act 3, we are going to have attack, or we are going to make our character very active. Character becomes proactive. In Act 4, we'll have resolution, that is climax plus transformation. The 4-act structure is the same skeleton as the 3-act structure, just with a better posture. For example, you can see 4-act structure in Pride and Prejudice and Wild by Cheryl Strayed. In Pride and Prejudice, Act 1 setup is the Bennet's world and marriage pressure. Act 2 is the response, where we have Elizabeth's judgment and Darcy's arrogance. Act 3, we have attack, that is Elizabeth sees her own bias. And then we have Act 4, resolution, where mutual transformation and love happens. Similarly, in Wild, we have setup, that is departure from chaos, response, physical exhaustion and loss, attack, or where your character gets very active or proactive, facing inner demons, and 4th, resolution, peace through acceptance. If your story's middle sags or drags, split it. Have your character react, then make them act. So basically what we are doing is we are dividing the 50% long Act 2 in the 3-act structure into 2 parts, where we are having first the character react and then act. First, because of the conflict, we are going to show their response and then we are going to show what they are going to do about it. Okay? Now, then similarly, we have 5-act structure also, and we have a 7-act structure and a 9-act structure also. But we are not going to go in detail with of them, because we are right now covering the basic structures that are most widely used. So the next structure that we are going to be talking about is the 7-point plot structure. Sorry, as I said, my throat is giving me a little bit of problem, so I'll just have my medicine. Just give me 1 second. Sorry. Okay. Now the 7-point plot structure or the 7-pinch point plot structure is for very precision, extreme precision mapping. It was created by Dan Wells. This model helps writers identify key turning points. It's extremely analytical, but also intuitive, especially for long novels and memoirs. Now, we are going to have 7 points in this structure. The first one is the hook, where we show protagonist's world before the change. Let's take the example of Kite Runner, Amir and Hassan's friendship. In plot turn 1, the event that changes everything. We have Hassan's assault or Amir's betrayal. Then comes pinch point 1. Pressure from the antagonist or fate. That is the resistance, the conflict that the character is going to face. In Kite Runner, we have Soviet invasion and loss of hope. Now, fourth is the midpoint, where the character will go through realization or shift of power. In Kite Runner, Amir learns the truth about Hassan. Then we have pinch point 2, crisis and the stakes peak. Here in the Kite Runner, we are going to have Rahim Khan's call, there's a way to be good again. Then we have plot turn 2 or plot point 2, final drive to climax, that is Amir's return to Kabul. And then we have resolution, that is transformation and meaning. And in Kite Runner, we have Amir saving Shorab, and that will be his redemption. This structure forces you to see the emotional pressure points in your story. If one's missing, the reader feels it, even if they can't name it. Now, if you want to see uh, the same story structure in Educated, you can actually see all the story structure in all the novels. You just have to be a little vigilant. So in Educated, we are going to have Hook, that is life on mountain. Plot point 1 will be the first school experience. Midpoint will be Cambridge revelation, and resolution will be claiming selfhood. Pinch points here will be the points where the tension is at the highest between any 2 points. Then there is the hero's journey. It is one of the most famous story structures. And this structure is actually only used by either fantasy writers or mythological writers or series writers if your story is extremely complex and involves an outside world or an unknown world where world building is required and we have different species of characters. For example, any science fiction novel, Dune, and every other novel in the fantasy genre, the science fiction genre, or the mythological fiction genre is based on hero's journey. First, we have the ordinary world, then we have the call to adventure, then refusal to that call, meeting the mentor, crossing the threshold, tests, allies, enemies, then approach to the inmost cave, ordeal, or death, where the character is rebirthed. Then we have the reward, then we have the road back, then we have resurrection, then we have return with the elixir. Whenever I look at this structure, the 12 steps of the hero's journey, I always remember Lord of the Rings. Always. The core idea here is that the hero leaves the unknown world, faces unknown, then returns back to his home changed, completely transformed. In Lord of the Rings, Frodo leaves the Shire, faces darkness, returns wiser. In Educated, Tara leaves her family, faces alienation, and returns intellectually reborn. It's not about slaying the dragons when it comes to complex stories. It's about what dies inside you so something new can live. Now, similar to the hero's journey, we have a heroine's journey by Maureen Murdoch as well. The only difference in both the structures is that in the heroine's journey, we talk more about inward than we do about outward journey. So instead of conquering, she integrates balancing the feminine and masculine within. For example, in Little Women, we have Joe March's arc, the Joe Arch's Joe March's arc is about reconciling ambition and belonging. And in Eat, Pray, Love, the spiritual, uh, the entire journey is extremely spiritual rather than heroic, but it is a journey nonetheless. So, in a way, we can say the hero goes to war with the world and the heroine makes peace with herself. But of course, that is not always the case. If you want to look at it, you can always read Brandon Sanderson's book, or there's so many books. Yeah, any book in fantasy genre, actually. Anyway, so then there's Freytag's Pyramid as well. Then there is Save the Cat Beat Sheet, which is by Blake Snyder. Then there is the Story Circle by Dan Harmon. Uh, then there's the Friction Curve, the Snowflake Method, the Story Grid by Sean Coyne, Three Disaster Structure by Dwight Swain, and Vonnegut's Story Shapes. So when it comes to structure, there are so many structures out there. But what you need to do is just pick one, basic one, start working from it. If your story is extremely complex, then yes, you will have to learn better structures. For that, you can get a couple of books, read through them, understand new structures, and try and implement those structures into your novel, or you can seek help with a developmental editor who already knows all this stuff. Now, moving on, this is the Freytag's pyramid. If you guys want, I can share the PDF with you. I'll share the link to the PDF download, and you guys can download this, and then you'll have everything. Now, we are actually already running out of time, so I'm just gonna be moving on to the next topic, that is story spine, and I'm just gonna cover it a bit quickly because I have a meeting in the next 25 minutes. Okay, so let's talk about the spine of the story. Now that we have dissected the visible skeleton of a story, the acts, the beats, and the structure, let's talk about the invisible spine. Because beneath every well-built story lies something you can't outline. And that something is what breathes through it, holds it together, and makes it unforgettable. That, my dear friend, is the spine of the story. That is the story's inner truth, its emotional core, its reason for existing. Again, the why your story exists is the spine of the story. Now, the story spine is actually a storytelling framework which was first popularized by Pixar, originally by playwright Ken Adams. It's very simple, it's very elegant, and it's extremely powerful because it captures cause and effect, and that is the essence of narrative flow. Here is the story spine framework. Once upon a time, there was every day, one day, because of that, because of that, until finally, ever since then. So these are the basic, this is the entire basic structure of a story spine. Uh, you can say each sentence pushes the next one. It's what transforms events into a story. Now, for example, I'll give you the example of Finding Nemo for this one. Once upon a time, there was a clownfish named Merlin who loved his son Nemo. Every day, he warned Nemo about the dangers of the ocean. One day, Nemo was captured by divers. Because of that, Merlin set off across the sea to find him. Because of that, he faced sharks, jellyfish, and his own fears until finally he learned to trust and let go. Ever since then, he allowed Nemo to swim freely. So Pixar stories are made this way. We can also apply this to educated, like so. Once upon a time, there was a girl named Tara living off the grid in rural Idaho. Every day she worked in her father's junkyard and obeyed his rules. One day she decided to attend school. Because of that, she entered a world her family despised. Because of that, she struggled between loyalty and freedom. Until finally she chose to define herself through knowledge. Ever since then, she never returned to the mountains except in memory. And Educated is actually a non-fiction book. So, as you can see, the frameworks or the structures can be applied to any story. When you can summarize your story in a story spine, you know it has a purpose. Everything else, that is scenes, dialogues, world building, will grow from this very root. So, this is a very good place to start your novel with or to start your story with. Now, let's again talk about theme. Now, these are basically the four components or that add to the spine of the novel. Theme, subtext, tone and mood, and cohesion. Let's quickly look at all of them. Theme answers the question, what is this story really about? Not on the surface, but underneath. It's not the moral, honesty is good kind of a thing. It's the exploration. What happens when we tell the truth in a dishonest world? The repercussions, the consequences. Theme isn't preached, it is revealed through choices. Now, sorry, let me give you some examples of thematic depth. In The Kite Runner, the surface plot is a boy seeks redemption for betraying his friend. And the deep theme is guilt can be redeemed only through courage. In The Great Gatsby, a man pursues an impossible love on the surface, but the theme is the American dream is an illusion built on longing. Sorry. In Educated, a girl breaks free from an isolated upbringing is the surface level story or the surface level plot. But the deeper theme is knowledge liberates, but it also alienates. In Becoming by Michelle Obama, the surface level plot is memoir of a public figure, but the deeper theme is identity is an ongoing evolution, not a fixed achievement. Then we have Life of Pi, where on the surface a boy is stranded with a tiger. But the deeper theme here is faith is how we survive the unbearable. Now, moving on, we have subtext. Subtext is like blood that carries emotion invisibly through the vein of the story. So imagine when I come across a novel that has no subtext, I immediately know it is not going to work. So, subtext, although seems very, very small, when you talk about it, it is actually as important as blood in body. Subtext is what is not said, but can be deeply felt. Is the truth hiding under dialogue, gesture, and silence in the actions of your characters? Readers don't need to hear it, they need to sense it. Okay? So you need to convey the subtext without actually saying it. Examples. In the remains of the day, Stevens never says he loves Miss Kenton, but the ache of regret permeates every single page of the novel. In Atonement, Bryony's entire life becomes a silent apology. That is subtext. Now, subtext is emotions camouflage. It's where your reader participates instead of just observing things. Now, moving on, we have tone and mood. Now, tone and mood have more to do with atmosphere than anything else. While structure and theme create logic, tone and mood create feeling. Tone is the writer's attitude towards the story. It can be hopeful, it can be irony, it can be mournful. And mood is the emotional environment felt by the reader. That is suspenseful, tender, melancholic. Yeah. Then tone belongs to the writer and mood belongs to the reader, but the two must dance in harmony. They should always be in harmony. For example, in The Lovely Bones, the tone is lyrical and tender, but the mood is hauntingly melancholy. In Gone Girl, the tone is cold and cynical, but the mood is uneasy and electric. They always go in harmony. In Educated, the tone is reflective and the mood is tense and claustrophobic, but then it shifts to liberating. Like to give you a practical tip here. Tone and mood shift with each act. Notice how the kite runner starts nostalgic, turns oppressive, and then ends redemptive. So the tonal evolution mirrors Amir's inner arc, and now that is layering. Okay? When it comes to tone and mood, remember the way a story feels is as important as what it says. Now, the last one is cohesion. Cohesion is basically when every element in your story belongs and nothing feels out of place. Everything feels inevitable. It is the seamless flow of cause, effect, and meaning throughout the narrative. It ensures that every scene, image, and emotion arises naturally from what came before and contributes to what follows. Nothing feels random or disconnected. When all these elements, spine, theme, subtext, tone, mood, will align, the story will be cohesive or whole or complete. Readers may not know why, but they feel it in their bones. Sorry. Sometimes you might remember, you might have watched a movie or might have read a book, but you weren't able to put into words why you didn't like it. If that has ever happened to you, then that means that the book was lacking, or the story, movie story, was lacking cohesion. Now, in order to make sure that your story is cohesive, you need to ask yourself three questions. Does every scene serve the same emotional thesis? Does every choice reflect the protagonist's inner conflict? And does the story end in harmony with its beginning? If you answer all these three questions in your story, via your story or your character, then your story will have cohesion. For example, in The Kite Runner, the kite string from the first act returns in the final act. Same image, but it has new meaning. In Educated, the mountain remains constant and unchanged, like a symbol of the family she left and the identity she reclaimed. So that's cohesion, when form and feeling echo each other, like a closing note returning to the song's first chord. Now, let's connect everything that we have learned so far. We have structure with acts and beats and movement. Then we have spine, that is the cause and effect engine. Then we have theme, that is the core exploration. Then we have subtext, that is hidden emotion. Then we have tone and mood, emotional environment, which function as emotional environment, and the cohesion, which is the harmony of all elements. Notice how every layer feeds the one below it, like organs in a living body. The story is not assembled, it's grown like a tree. And these are the little different, say, fertilizer, watering, and caring, and sunlight, and all the different things that we do to grow a tree. Now, I'm going to quickly talk about turning ideas into stories. I have so many people ask me this question. I have this idea, but how do I know if it can be turned into a story? So here's my answer to that question. This is the 4-question story test. If you can answer these 4 questions, then that means your story can be formed. Can be formed. I'm not saying it should be formed or it will be formed. It can be formed. Okay, after that also you need a couple of things. But this is the very basic 4-question story test that you are going to do on your ideas or concepts. Who is it about? What do they want? What stands in their way? And what changes by the end? If you are able to answer these 4 questions, then you definitely have an idea that can be changed into a story. Just a second. Now, if you have an idea or a concept that answers all the 4 questions, then move on to what if method. In what if method, we keep on asking ourselves, what if, what if, what if, what if? What if this happened? What if that happened? What if the character doesn't get this? What if the character gets this? So that is basically the exploration that we do. Examples of the what if method. What if a man woke up to find everyone in his city vanished overnight? That's I Am Legend. What if memories could be erased like files? Eternal sunshine of the spotless mind. What if education itself became an act of rebellion? Educated. What if redemption required facing the person you failed most? The kite runner. The right what if question always implies conflict. What's your story? That's basically your story's heartbeat. Now, take your own idea, whatever idea you are currently working with, or maybe you want to work with, and add 5 what if variations to it. For example, what if the stranger sending voice messages is already dead? What if the protagonist starts to fall in love with a voice? So you need to be connecting them like that. Each what if will deepen the conflict and expand emotional stakes. One second. We're done with this. Now we are going to be talking about the last thing that I have with me here for this session, that is discovering the writer within. Now, so far I've given you all the tools that you need to turn your story, to turn your idea into story. So in the last section, we saw how you can make sure that the idea that you have is actually quite potential to be turned into a story. Once you, once you are done with the 4 question test, and then you add a lot of what ifs, and then you have a basic premise for the story, try and use the story structure, try and answer all the questions, and try to apply all the elements that we have studied so far, and you will have a good story at your hand. Now, why am I covering this section, Discovering the Writer Within, is because in order to write the story that you want to write, you need to self-identify your creative rhythm. And that is what this is about. There are 3 types of writers, or basically there are 2 types of writers. On a spectrum, everyone is actually both the types of writers, but to what degree you do what is essentially what matters. The first type is the planner, who plans everything before writing. The second one is the pantster, writing by the seat of their pants. Hmm. Writing by the seat, this is writing by the pants of the seat of their pants. This is basically the discovery writer. So they discover as they write. But there is another approach, that is the hybrid approach. You need to start like a plotter with a structure. Even if that structure is not extremely well defined, you still need to have a little bit of a structure. If you do not want to get lost in story structure and you have a fairly good idea of how stories flow, that only happens when you are a big time reader, because only then subconsciously you'll already know what you want or need from your story. Then just simply start with a beginning, middle, and end structure. Okay? So start with a structure like a plotter or a planner. When you are writing the book, that time you write with freedom. You need to pants it out. Okay? Write by the seat of your pants. And discovery writing is the best type of writing because it gets the juiciest bits out from you only when you are discovering everything while writing, going in a trance and writing basically. But with pantsing comes the problem of not being able to complete the novel, which is again another one of the things that I'm asked about the most. How do I complete the novel? So the answer is go back to structuring. Write how much ever you can, go back to structuring, see what you need, what else you need, what are the next things that you need to do, maybe what are the next scenes that you need to write, maybe what are the character traits you need to work on, and then come back to writing as a pantster. So you are mixing both approaches. Now, when it comes to revising and rewriting, again, you will have to employ the discipline of a plotter, because writing a novel needs a lot of discipline. And this is something that I will never agree on if someone is saying otherwise. We have many great authors who've written only 1 or 2 novels in their lifetime. How much better would it have been to read more novels by them? So, if you want to see, starting a novel is easy, but finishing a novel is what takes a lot of planning and a lot of discipline. And that is where planning or plotting comes very handy. That is why we learn story structures, and that is why we are going about it from this end. Now, that's about it. So, we have finished the first session of the Writing Fundamentals series. I'm exceptionally happy because I was feeling so unwell and my throat was almost giving out on me. But I'm glad that we did not stop and that I was able to take this session so that we can move on to the second one in next on next Saturday in next week. So thanks a lot for watching. I really appreciate it. I'm going to be checking the comments now because there was a lot of lagging going on, so I wasn't able to kind of keep a track on the comments. Next time, probably I won't be going live from Zoom. I will be going live directly through YouTube so that I'm able to see your comments and so that the video won't lag this much. But overall, I'm happy with however we did this using Zoom because I really wanted you guys to have the presentation in front of you. But maybe next time we'll shake up things a little bit, or maybe I'll have someone to help me here uh, with me. So hopefully, I will see you all next week, Saturday, same time, 5 o'clock. And we will be talking about characters. So do not miss out next session. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to like this video. And don't forget to share it in your writing circles or with your writing friends. It might help someone start writing their novel. Thank you so much. I'll see you all next week. Bye bye.